Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, August 8th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game in 25 days. The game against Michigan in 109 days. We are into week 2 of Ohio State's fall camp. Buckeyes checked into their hotel, the official big hotel check-in day, one of those weird Ohio State traditions we've talked about on one of the shows late last week with Tony Gerdeman. So that is now done, and now it's time to actually focus on camp. We're going to be talking or hearing from Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles today. Knowles and his defense, obviously one of the very, very big topics of conversation over the course of this fall. Talked to Devin Radcliffe about Knowles' defense a little bit last week. Going to be trying to talk to Ross Fulton a little bit later on this week about some of the stuff going on with the safeties. Today, you're going to be hearing straight from Knowles about a bunch of guys where you'll hear a little bit of different stuff, but we're going to really be hearing a lot about a bunch of guys who might have a chance to make their first impact on the defense, or the first real impact on the defense this fall. We're going to start with a guy who's probably not going to do quite that much, but he is the newest face on the Ohio State defense, and that is Nigel Glover. He is a true freshman. He's out of Northmont in the Dayton area, but he did not originally sign with the Buckeyes as part of the 2023 class. He actually signed with Northwestern. And then after the whole Pat Fitzgerald situation went down, he decided, maybe this is not the place for me, entered the transfer portal, and now he's a Buckeye. So you're going to hear a little bit about what made them decide they wanted to go after Nigel Glover, and what's actually, there'll be a little bit of a follow-up there about what's actually realistic for him this season.
Yeah, we've known about Nigel for a long time, and really it's his attitude, the way that he wants to improve, that he's so into the X's and O's. He's that kind of kid. He's the kind of kid that's coachable and wants to learn.
What's realistic for him this year?
That's hard to say, right? I mean, first thing is we have to get him to know where his classes are and all. He's still a freshman, so we'll wait and see.
Someone who's been around Ohio State a lot longer than Nigel Glover is Court Williams. He's a safety. It feels like he's been at Ohio State since about the mid-2000s. Not quite that long, but he missed all of last year with an injury. Now he's back, and they're moving him a little closer to the line of scrimmage. No longer a safety. He's now with the linebacker. So what's the thought with moving Court Williams up to linebacker?
Yeah, I mean, Court is he's a guy we always felt would be better off closer to the line of scrimmage. So, we've debated that move for a while, kind of in the house. He's kind of moved back and forth. We just thought it was the right time to move him down fully, and he'll still play some Sam linebacker in our 4-3, but Court is a first class young man. It's great to have him at linebacker.
Mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking to Ross Fulton later this week, hopefully, about the safeties, and there have been some changes at safeties from the things that we were sort of assuming we were going to see based on what we saw in the spring to what we actually saw last week when the Buckeyes were actually on the practice field. Jihad Carter, we expected to see him probably with the ones, but we thought we might see him at nickel. No, he's going to be at the adjuster safety position now, the deep safety position. Sonny Styles, we thought he was going to be out there somewhere, weren't sure quite where. Well, he's at nickel. Lathan Ransom now running at the bandit position, which is their sort of boundary safety position. So Sonny Styles, Jihad Carter, a lot of first-team reps on day one of fall camp last week. So what did they do to earn those spots with the ones?
Jihad, being a transfer, has just been a very coachable player. He's one of those guys you can say something to, correct it, and he corrects it immediately on the field. That's rare. So his learning and processing of our system has been great. And then, Sonny is that guy that we are continually trying to find ways to get him on the field, to let him be a factor in the game. So, plan on him being out there a lot.
Mentioned earlier that we saw Jihad Carter a lot in the slot this spring. That was where he played a lot when he was at Syracuse before he transferred over to Ohio State before this season. But then Carter got hurt in the middle of the spring, and so then we didn't get to see the rest of the spring and where he actually was going to end up. So he was in the slot this spring, but when you listen to Knowles talk, and when you look at the practice field at the Woody, it does not sound like or look like that's where he's going to end up this fall.
Jihad is more of a high safety. Yeah, I mean, we experimented with him on the slot, and that's part of learning the system. You know, it's good for safeties to play different positions early, but he's more of a high safety.
What does he do well as a high safety?
He processes. Yeah, he understands the game. He sees the whole field, and he processes things quickly.
This is year 2 for Jim Knowles and his defense, and year 2 for Ohio State's players actually being in the same defense under the same coordinator for the first time in back-to-back years in a long, long time. So are things starting to click now in year 2 under the defense for these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I do see it clicking. I see, players in the right spot, players understanding, and more of the why, why I call a certain thing. I expect our older guys to be able to answer that, not just what or where or how, but why. What's the purpose behind this call? And they're able to see that now.
One of the things that's really interesting about the spots at the safety position is Knowles wants guys to be flexible and potentially able to play maybe more than one role or be able to do more than one thing in those different safety spots. But also, you get guys kind of learning the defense in some cases and learning a new spot. So how do you balance that? You've got your bandit, you got adjuster, you got nickel. How do you balance wanting the guys to really know their spot inside and out with also maybe taking the time to learn some other stuff and be flexible in different positions?
Yeah, I love flexibility, but at the same time, you don't want to cheat the player. So there is a real balance to that. I love that, to have that flexibility. But the more reps a guy gets at a certain position performing those fundamentals, the better he's going to be. So right now, I'm leaning more towards, get him set, get him in place, let him, get better at the fundamentals of that position.
There's been some shuffling on the back end of the defense, but not a whole lot of shuffling on the front of the defense, that front 6, front 7. The defensive line, you got a lot of those guys back from last year. You've got JT Tuimoloau, you got Jack Sawyer, you got Michael Hall, Tyleik Williams, you got Ty Hamilton. I mean, this is a very deep, very good, and veteran defensive line. So what is the ceiling for the defensive line this year?
Sky is the limit. Got the best coach. You got veteran players. You got some depth. The heat, repetition up front. You need a lot of depth so those guys can play fast. But I don't see any limitations to why they can't be, the best in the country.
Behind that defensive line, you've got a couple of returning starters at linebacker as well. Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers. Those guys did not get to play a lot together, really at all, this spring because Eichenberg was out with an injury. So what was it like to see those guys back out there, have Tommy Eichenberg back out there on the field for Jim Knowles?
That's great to have Tommy back. He's our leader. He's the type of guy that I can yell at and he'll yell back at me. So, I mean, that's the kind of relationship you want. You want guys who are convicted and, if they believe something, you can have an exchange. And that's Tommy because he's passionate. He cares. He never wants to make a mistake. So when you have guys like that, you got a good chance.
Last year, Knowles talked about the fact that he maybe made a bad decision putting Jack Sawyer at the jack position, which is that sort of stand-up, walk-around defensive end kind of position. Thinks he maybe cost Jack Sawyer a little bit of development time last year because he pulled him away from that normal hand-in-the-dirt Larry Johnson 4-3 defensive end role. So this year he's talking about moving C.J. Hicks to that spot and having him do some of that in addition to playing at the will linebacker position. So does he have similar concerns that this might hurt C.J. Hicks' development long-term? Why or why not?
I think They're different players. They're different players, and CJ's got that short space, quickness, and burst. Jack is more powerful, so I just think CJ fits the mold better.
And when you got a guy like Hicks, how do you balance not putting too much on him while also still not limiting him to one spot?
Yeah, I mean, that is my job, is to make sure that he is the best he can be. So that is constantly focusing on that, not putting too much on him. So you watch the film and you put a little bit, you just kind of go back and forth to see where his best learning curve is.
We've talked a lot about Sonny Styles on this show today, last week, last month, all year, basically. One of the big topics of conversation pretty much all year. He's not the only Styles on this team. His older brother, Lorenzo Styles Jr., transferred from Notre Dame this spring. He'd been a wide receiver at Notre Dame, moved over to corner just at the very last couple weeks he was at Notre Dame. and now is going to be playing corner at Ohio State. It is very early. He's got to learn a new defense. He's got to learn a whole new position. So probably not going to be a day one starter by any means. But what have Jim Knowles' first impressions of Lorenzo Styles Jr. been?
I like Lorenzo. He's a great, he's a really good young man. And, he breaks on the ball well. He sees things like he sees crack blocks by receivers and replacing. He's got some real natural skills out there.
This is now year 2 for Jim Knowles. And so now you can start, this is the second time through. Now you've seen it a couple times. So you can start looking back and going, okay, how are things different now as compared to a year ago? So, all right. What has he seen week 1 of fall ball at Ohio State compared to year 1 last year?
I just see quality. I think he did. I see quality. I see adjustments. I see fits. I hear more than see communication. Communication is the biggest thing, particularly with this generation, because they're on their phones all the time. And sometimes they text each other when they're sitting in the same room. So our job is to get them to talk to each other.
Mentioned earlier, C.J. Hicks potentially playing that jack position. Someone else at the jack position that they're expecting to have there, Mitchell Melton. He came in as a linebacker and kind of bulked up and looked like he was on his way to potentially a big role on last year's team before he hurt his knee during the spring game. Missed the whole season, missed the spring as well. Now he's finally back out there. So where do things stand with him now that he's finally back out there and trying to learn a new position?
We want to get Mitchell back on his feet as a rush end, and then eventually work into some jack with him. Mitch just needs playing reps and playing speed and playing conditioning. He's been out a while.
One of the early takeaways from week 1, the cornerbacks look pretty darn good. This is, again, you're going against Ohio State wide receivers. That's probably a pretty good indication that you may be onto something there. That corner room was just decimated by injuries last year. This year, so far so good on that front. And when they've been healthy, and they're all out there, boy, it has looked pretty good this year. So how does that potentially change things for Knowles and his defense?
It changes everything. It allows you to, play with everybody else with their eyes on the ball, and allow those guys the other 9 to run around and make all those plays. When you can eliminate people on the outside, it makes things a lot easier.
When you think back to the 2019 Ohio State defense, you probably think Chase Young. You probably think Jeff Okudah, maybe Jordan Fuller. That was a defense that really married a really strong pass rush with some really good coverage in the secondary. So if Jim Knowles is high on the pass rush, as he certainly seems to be, and he's pretty encouraged by what he's seen out of the cornerbacks and the coverage so far, that feels like that might be a recipe for a pretty good defense.
We call that one of our winning edges. I say coverage and rush, and they say working together. So you could say that to any of our defensive guys. You say coverage and rush, they say working together. So we know that those two go together, and the better the rush is, the better the coverage is. Better the coverage is, the better the rush becomes. So it's just they're intertwined.
Well, we are heading into what will be a very busy week of coverage at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We're going to be talking to players and Ohio State coaches this week. We're scheduled to be there Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for interviews. Friday, we'll have a chance to watch some practice, get another look on where things stand, maybe have a sense for what has changed over the course of the first week and 2 weeks of practice. That's where you sort of start to get a sense for who may be making a move, different possibilities of lineup changes from where things started on camp, and much more. So we're going to have plenty of coverage this week at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And of course at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. We tend to stream all of those interviews live, or as many of them as we can. Get them all up there so you can hear from all the Buckeye players and coaches. Learn as much as you can about this year's team, because boy, as I said off the top of the show, we are getting fairly close. Less than 4 weeks away to the first game against Indiana. It is getting there. Football season almost here. Also a pretty busy time on the recruiting trail for the Buckeyes. Another potential commitment potentially coming in a little over 2 weeks or thereabouts. So this would be a great time to join up at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Get access to our fantastic team of recruiting analysts, Mark Gifler and Alex Gleitman, keeping an eye on all of that. Devin and Justin and Ross and Mikey covering you on all the X's and O's, all the scheme stuff. We got some really good feedback on the Devin Radcliffe show from last week. So we'll try and do some more X's and O's kind of shows for you coming up, but you can ask those guys questions on our Huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com if you remember. And also, of course, Tony and Kevin and I covering the team, talking to the players, giving you a little inside analysis on what's going on at practice, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and much, much more on what could be a very, very exciting Ohio State season. Buckeyes ranked number 4 in the coaches poll that just came out on Monday. Little team from Ann Arbor, Michigan, number 2. Could be another pretty good season in the old Big Ten East as they wrap things up in the old divisional alignment. Buckeyes, Wolverines, Penn State, all looking like they're going to be in for a pretty good season. So it should be a fun fall in Columbus and around the Midwest. So join us and celebrate it all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.